4. 1 Peter chapter 4. We've been in 1 Peter for about 6 months now, and we are actually, believe it or not, we're coming to the end here in just a few weeks. And but this whole letter that Peter wrote it's really helpful for us because he's talking to people that are following Jesus amongst the people and in a place that they're not following Jesus. This is a culture they're not giving themselves to Jesus. They've turned inward. That if there's any hope for my life, there's any hope for my future, for my happiness, it's going to be me making the most of it. And so this is the culture of those that Peter is writing to, and it's really helpful for us because this is the culture of where we come from. This is our culture. This is American culture. And so what Peter has been saying lately is that to follow Jesus, to follow Jesus in that culture, to follow Jesus in that place, to follow Jesus amongst the people and in that culture, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel isolated at work. You're going to feel alone at school. You may even feel alone in your own home with your own family. But you're living, Peter is saying, you're living as an exile. You cannot forget that you're living as an exile. What everyone else is living for is not what you're living for. You may have friends that are just all they are, all their hope is living for the next weekend, but you're not. As a follower of Jesus, you're living for the next million years. They're living to make sure their comfort and their reputation stays intact. You're living for the glory of God no matter what comes. Whatever it takes, the glory of God, making Jesus known to your friends, to your neighbors, to your family. And Peter has been saying, look, I know this can be hard. And if I could just say, I am so glad that he said that. I am so glad that we had this letter. There's a gentleman that a couple weeks ago, he walked out and he's like, man, this is hard stuff. This letter is hard. And I'm like, yes, I agree, but I am so glad that he wrote this because I feel this. I go through this, like following Jesus. And when you're following and it's just hard, like I like to know that this is what's expected. Like this is part of it. This is what it means to follow Jesus. It is going to be hard. And Peter is saying, look, and I know this can be hard. He says, but don't give up. Like don't give up on doing the right thing. Don't waste your life going back and living like everybody else. There is a better way to life. It is the best way. Even if it brings you suffering, this is the best that life can bring. Keep following Jesus. Do not give up. It is worth it. And this is what we saw last week. Peter said, look, if you're willing to get to the place where you're willing to suffer, to say no to sin and yes to Jesus, then what power does sin have on you? Like if you're at the point where you're saying, I would rather suffer than not follow Jesus, then Peter says, then you're done with sin. Because what can sin do to you? Sin has lost its power on you. If you're willing to say no to sin by even suffering, then you won't go back, and that's a good thing. Because Peter, all the way throughout this letter, was going, "Hey, you've got to remember what's coming. We got to remember the future." In chapter 1, he's talking about, "Hey, remember your inheritance. For followers of Jesus, you've got this. I know it's bad now, but you know what's coming. You have no idea. You've got an inheritance that he said is unfading. It is undefiled. Like it is not broken with sin. It will never stop. It will never go away. This is what is coming for you. So listen, don't put your hope in this stuff when you know you got this coming. Don't put your hope in this life when you know you've got this inheritance that is coming for all followers of Jesus." And then in chapter 4, Peter says, God sees how we live in this life, and it matters for the life to come. That God sees the way in which you live your life now, and it matters. It shapes what eternity is going to look like for you. We will all stand accountable before Jesus for what we did in this life. So Peter says, so pay attention to your life. Pay attention. Don't fulfill your desires in a selfish way. Don't fulfill these desires in a sinful way, but live for the will of God. That's what Peter comes to next. Practically, what does it mean to live for the will of God? What does this mean to live for the will of God? And so he starts in verse 7 in chapter 4. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, and he's going to say, therefore, here's how you live your life. In light of this statement that all things, the end of all things is at hand, here's how you live your life. Let me just say this. There is a lot that is packed in this word therefore right here. Before we move on, I think it's good for us to just pause for a moment and just acknowledge something. Because the culture would come at us, the culture that we live in wants to tell us that there is no therefore. That there is no therefore, that there is no basis, there is no standard for how we live our life. The culture, your teachers at school, your coworkers, your friends, maybe even your family will tell us, look, when it comes to the big questions in life, like is there a God, or what, is there life after death, or is there meaning to life? When it comes to these big questions in life, we just don't know. This is what you'll hear. You'll hear this in school. You hear this in college. You hear this everywhere you go. We just don't know. This is the growing trend of what's acceptable in our culture. When it comes to these things about is there a God, meaning to life, life after death, we just don't know. We don't know. But at the same time, the culture that says we can't be sure if there is a God or if there is meaning to life, that same culture will tell us, but racism is wrong. And violence is wrong. And when it comes to sexuality, you just do whatever you want. You just do whatever feels right. And so we have to ask, if nobody can know if there is a God, if there's no meaning into this life, then who in the world gets to determine what is right and what is wrong? If there's no basis, if there's no standard, then who says racism is wrong? Who says violence is wrong? I mean, if it's good and right to follow my sexual instincts wherever they may go, then why isn't it good and right for me to follow my aggressive or my violent instincts wherever they might go? Like, who in the world has the right to choose? Who's making the choice? Like, who's making the decision to tell me which of my instincts are right and which of my instincts are wrong? What I'm saying is to remove a standard, to remove the basis of morality, it makes no sense. We can't live this way. We can't live in a culture where there is no basis, but just somebody determines, no, these things that you feel are right, but these things are wrong. A culture can't stand. It will never hold up in the end because it's always changing. It's always based upon who says what and who are we going to listen to. Well, that is not the way it goes with Christianity. Because Christianity always has a therefore. Christianity tells us there is a God. Christianity tells us there is indeed meaning to this life and that God created our life to go in a certain way, and that is the standard. That is the standard. That is the basis for what is right and for what is wrong. That there is a right way to live and there is a wrong way to live. And that what the therefore ultimately points to is what God has created for us, the way that God has created our lives to be lived. And the good news is the way in which God has created our life to be lived, it leads to our greatest good. It leads to our greatest joy. And so Peter says, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, live this way. Therefore, there is a therefore because there's a basis. There's a standard by which we've been given to live. The end of all things is at hand, therefore live this way. So Peter just said, this little statement at the top or at the front here, the end of all things is at hand. He just said in verses 5 and 6, he just said that the judge, God is standing ready to judge the living and the dead. That's what he said in 5 and 6. God is ready. So remember what he was saying. We saw this last week. He said, so don't waste your life giving yourself to all these things, these ways of the world. Like don't waste your life going back to the old life. Don't waste your life doing that. And then he says, hey, just so you know, God is ready to judge the living and the dead. Just putting some weight on this. How you live here matters. God is ready to judge the living and the dead. So when is that going to happen? It's going to happen in the end. It's going to happen in the end. And so here Peter says, and the end of all things is at hand. So this presents a problem. Because Peter wrote this like 2,000 years ago. And here we are. I mean, Peter said, the end of all things is at hand. 2,000 years later, here we are. Here we are. We're still reading what Peter says, the end of all things is at hand. So what is going on here? What's happening? Is Peter just like the guy that stands out in the corner? It's got like the sign says, the end is near, and he's the crazy that nobody listens to? Like, is that the way we should take Peter here? I mean, it seems like, there have been a lot of other people that have said similar things, that the end of all things is at hand. There have been a lot of other people that have made predictions, put dates on the return of Jesus, and obviously they didn't know what they were talking about. So is that what's happening here? Is that what Peter is doing? He's just lost his mind. He thought something was going to happen, and it never came, and here we are 2,000 years. Maybe we're the crazies because we can just keep talking about it. So what's going on here? Well, right before Jesus ascended into heaven, the disciples tried to get Jesus to tell them when the end would come. And it wasn't the first time. There had been other times. It's like, okay, tell us, when's this all going to happen? When's the end? Like, when's this all going to take place where you're going to come down and reign as king and set up your kingdom? Like, when is this going to happen? So Jesus had died. He had been raised from the dead. And so, it's a good question, right? They're like, okay, so is this it? Is now the time? And so in Acts chapter 1, this is what we see. Right before Jesus ascends into heaven, they ask him the question, all right, when's it going to happen? Is this it? Are we ready? Are we ready to go? Here's what Jesus says to them. He says, it is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. When is the end going to get? Like, when are you going to return? When are you going to set up your kingdom? When's this all going to go down? Jesus says, it is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. So, this is what he says to the disciples. So Peter, the one that's writing this, he was right there. In fact, if you know much about Peter, it very well could have been Peter asking the question, when's this all going to happen? Jesus, we want to know. Give us the answer. Give us a clue here. So Peter was there. So in other words, Peter does not know. And he knows that he does not know. In fact, in another conversation that Peter had with Jesus, Jesus told Peter, Peter, you're going to die for following me, and let me tell you how you're going to die. So Peter knows that this isn't going to end before he dies. Like, he's going to die. Like Jesus told him, you're going to die, and this is how it's going to go down. So he's not claiming to know when the end will come or that it's going to come in that moment. He's not claiming that he knows when Jesus is returning. But here's what Peter is doing here. Peter is thinking in terms of redemptive history, or you could say it this way. He's thinking in terms of the story of God. So the story of God has several major acts in it, several major like chapters in the story of God. And so ever since creation, that there is the story of God is comprised of some major kind of moments in history where God was accomplishing, that was moving toward God's ultimate purpose. And so it begins with creation. God created things to glorify him, to make much of him, to show who he is. But then what happens? The fall happens, right? In the garden, we turn from him. Sin enters into the world, and then there's another major moment is the calling of Abraham. There's this old man that God says, "Hey, I'm coming to you, and I'm going to give you. I'm going to make you a nation. I'm going to make you my people." And so this is a major point of history, major point of the redemptive story, the story of God. And then what happens? The God's people, they find themselves in Egypt in slavery. How can we be God's people and in slavery? Well, God sends Moses in to bring them out of slavery. This is a major moment in the story of God. And then it comes where Jesus, he shows up, right? He's born and he lives this perfect life, and he dies a sacrificial death, and he is raised from the dead. And then Jesus ascends into heaven, and right after Jesus ascends into heaven, God sends down his Holy Spirit to live in those who put their trust in Jesus, and the church is born. And now, the only part of the story of God that is left is the return of Jesus, where Jesus will come to this earth and he will reign here as king forever with those who belong to him. So ever since Jesus ascended into heaven on that day and the church was born, we have been in this last act of the story of God. We don't know when Jesus will return, but we know that the end is at hand. We don't know when Jesus could return, but we know that it could be any minute. And Peter is saying, look, live your life as though Jesus could return at any moment, because at any minute he could be here, and then judgment. And so I was trying to think about how to illustrate this, how to like Jesus coming and the end is at hand, and so be prepared. And so I thought of one little illustration. And I don't know if it works, but it's what I've got. All right. A few weeks ago, we're at group, our small group, and what that looks like for our group, we meet on Sunday nights, and we meet in somebody's house. And we have dinner, so all of our kids are there, and we're all there, and we all have dinner together. And then at some point during the night, the kids go down with someone to watch them, and then we spend an hour, 15, hour and a half sometimes just reading through the Bible and talking about how do we live this out. That's what group looks like for us. Well, so on this particular night, we finish up, and everybody's cleaning up. They're getting their kids ready to go. And at some point, I tell my youngest, Addison, I tell her, hey, you need to get your shoes on, get your coat on, because we're getting ready to go. Well, on this night, she looks at me and says, Dad, you always say that. You always say we're going to leave, and we never leave. And I'm like, no. I'm always going, no. Tonight, we're leaving. We're leaving. You got to get ready. We got to be ready to go. Everything we came to do is over. We ate. We did the Bible and the talk thing, and it's time to go. It's over. And so what happens? Addison, you ready to go? And she's just not buying it. She's not buying it. And it's because, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but it's typically because mom is always finding someone to talk to. Typically the way it goes. So I'm going, hey, but you just got to be ready. You just got to be ready to go at any moment, all right? Because she's going to be done at any moment. And you just got to be ready. You know, like the truth of the matter is, oftentimes we could probably go home for a bit and then come back, but and we'd still have time to, but if we were gone and she was ready to go, that would not be good. And so I'm like, I said, we just got to be ready. We got to be ready. Coats on, shoes on, like any moment. We're just going to just be ready to go. That's kind of what Peter is saying here, all right? That's kind of what Peter is saying here. Jesus could be here at any time, so live your life, have your coat on and your shoes on, ready to go. Ready, you're living for the will of God. You're living in the way of Jesus because Jesus could come at any time, which means, one, judgment is going to be here. And how you live now will determine what that will look like for you. And two, you don't want to waste your life anymore on this. You don't want to waste your life and not live for your life for what you've been created for. The end is at hand. So how do we live in the meantime? How do we live ready for Jesus to return at any moment? So this is what Peter is saying. He says, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Self-controlled and sober-minded, they both have to do with the way we think. Peter is saying that we need to be fully in control of our thoughts, that we can see clearly, that we can think clearly, that we know the reality for what it really is. In other words, there is something about the way that this world works, the way of our culture, that can cause you to be like a drunk and be out of your mind. That you drink up the way of the world and the way the world thinks, and you will completely lose touch with reality and you won't even know it. In other words, living as an exile, as a stranger among people who don't recognize Jesus as king, who don't follow Jesus, who don't see the world the way that you see the world. When you suffer for following Jesus, when you suffer for doing the right thing, when it would seem easier to just go ahead and give in to the way of the world, Peter says, listen, be self-controlled, be sober-minded. Don't give yourself to the thoughts and the ways of the culture, of the way that everybody else is thinking. Their ideas about God and money and sex and relationships and marriage and the meaning of life. You need to get your mind on the reality of what is true, on the truth of what God says, who God says he is, what God says this life is all about, and all of those things are about in this life. And Peter, he connects the coming of Jesus to being sober-minded to prayer. He connects the coming of Jesus, thinking clearly, to prayer. And he does this just like Jesus did this. This is in Luke chapter 21. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn there. Luke chapter 21. Jesus has been teaching on, just go left for a little bit, all right? Matthew, Mark, Luke. If you're using one of those Bibles underneath the seats, we're on page, let me get there. We're on page 881. Jesus had been teaching through the coming of Jesus, like the end times, like when it's going to happen, or what's going to look like when the end comes. And so he's talking about things like persecution, like if you're going to follow Jesus, you're going to be persecuted for this. And he's talking through all of these things. And then he says this in chapter 21, verse 34, he says this. But watch yourself. So this is the last day, right? So in the last days, he said, in these last days, he says, but watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. What day? The day that he returns, the day of judgment. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man, which is Jesus himself. He says, pray that you have strength to escape all of these things. Now, what's he talking about here? Well, he just told them that they're going to be persecuted. He just told them that they're going to suffer for it. In fact, he has told his disciples, and most of them, you're going to die for this. And so it can't be, when he says, pray that you will escape this, it can't be escape suffering. It can't be even escape death for this. When he says pray that you would escape all these things, he is talking about, he's telling them to pray for strength to not fall into the drunkenness and the foolishness of this world. To not fall into thinking that your best shot at a fulfilled and joy-filled life is in what you can get out of this, and that relationship, and that amount of money, and that job, and that house, and these things, whatever it is. He says, stay alert, stay self-controlled, sober-minded, so that you can see the reality of the way things are. So that when Jesus comes to set it all straight and judge the living and the dead, you will not be found with your faith undone by the foolishness of this world. Don't get caught in the trap of the way of thinking the way everybody else thinks. Thinking the way all your friends are thinking, that this is what a good time looks like, that this is what pleasure looks like, that this is what success looks like. Don't get caught in this trap. Stay alert. See things for what they really are. Or else you'll be found when Jesus comes with your faith undone. And it happened because you gave yourself to the thinking, the foolishness of this world. So Peter says, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. You need to be able to know what reality is so you know how to pray. You need to know what to pray for. So you're not spending all your prayers and just give me more comfort and bless me with more of this and this and this and this, so you just get lost in that stuff. You need to know what to pray for. You need to know how to pray. You need to know the reality of the way life works, so you know what to pray for. Theologian Karl Barth once said this. He says, to clasp the hands in prayer is the beginning of an uprising against the disorder of the world. That hands folded in prayer is a posture of rebellion to foolishness of the world. To say, I don't want that. I don't want to fall into the desires of the world. I don't want to fall into the way of the world. I see where it leads. I don't want that. The end is at hand. We're exiles here. We're living among people who don't follow Jesus. We're living among people who see following Jesus as a joke. We're living among people who see following Jesus as a waste of time. Well, let's just be honest. We're living among people who attend church on the weekends. And they call that following Jesus. And when they see you following Jesus Monday through Saturday, they think you're a joke. They think you're taking this way too serious. So what do? Peter says, don't fall in. Don't fall in. We don't get consumed with the way of the world and lose our minds. We're self-controlled and sober-minded, so then we know how to pray. And then he says in verse 8, he says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sin. Followers of Jesus, we're exiles. We don't belong here. We don't fit in here. But we have each other. We have one another. We have this. We're here together. We are exiles here together. How do we live? What do? We love one another earnestly. We don't give up on this. We don't give up on doing this together. Earnestly comes from a word that describes something that is stretched or extended. The love that followers of Jesus have for one another is a love that stays in it when it's stretched. It's a love that grows when it is tested. That's what Peter is saying when he says that love covers a multitude of sins. Where earnest love is among followers of Jesus, where we fail one another, and we will fail one another in many ways, in many small ways, and even in some big ways, we will fail one another. But when that happens among a people who are earnestly loving one another, those things are readily overlooked and forgotten. We don't hold on to those things. Our go-to in our relationship with one another is not that we're easily offended or that we're just suspicious of each other's motives, but that when we are wronged, and we will be wronged, we just assume the best and we don't give up on loving one another. We're family here. We go through some stuff together and we will rub each other the wrong way, but we love each other. And where our love is stretched, it grows. And so what does that look like? How is that played out? How does this kind of earnest love amongst followers of Jesus who are exiles together, like how do we play that? How is that played out? Well, Peter's going to tell us in verse 9. He says, show hospitality for one to one another without grumbling. How do we love each other earnestly? We show hospitality to one another without grumbling. In other words, this earnest kind of love. It's more than just a, hey, I'm just putting up with you, and you're just putting up with me. No, this goes in, where we're in each other's homes. We are a people that we're opening our lives, our homes up to one another. In the immediate context here, Peter's readers that would have originally read this, they were a people that their churches would have been scattered throughout the city, and they would have met in homes all throughout the city. And so somebody had to host the gathering of the church, and whoever was hosting the gathering of the church really put themselves in a lot of risk. Because in the random kind of anti-Christian persecution that was happening in that day, that family could have been the target of persecution that was coming, which could be part of the reason why Peter mentioned the hospitality without grumbling bit. But I'm sure there are other things that Peter was talking about when he said, show hospitality without grumbling. Like perhaps not grumbling about the time and effort that it takes to put dinner on the table, to have the house straightened up and ready for company to come over, for people to come over. I've mentioned this before, but so our small group that I was talking about, we meet between 3 different houses throughout the month, and we just rotate. And but for years, it was only at our house. And if for many of those nights, if you were to peek in and see what was happening, like our group starts at 6, if you were to peek in and see what was happening in our home at about 5:30, you'd see it was a little crazy. All right, it was a little crazy. We were like, everybody was kind of just scrambling to get the house ready. My wife's in the kitchen throwing stuff in the oven, and the kids and I were picking stuff up, and we're vacuuming and just trying to get things ready for because group is coming over. And And if I'm just being honest with you, we can be honest, right? I can be honest. Like, you're not going to judge me over this, right? So many of those nights, if you were to peek in, you probably wouldn't be so proud of your pastor. I'm just going to say. I'm just like bad attitude, just like I'm vacuuming. I'm like, can't believe I'm doing this right now, and picking stuff up and all this. And of course, I don't say anything because I'm passive aggressive, all right? So, which is great for my wife. But this is just, I'm kind of in a frenzy. My wife tells me my feet get heavy. My feet get heavy. My wife is just very kind, but I'm just kind of, which she means I'm just stomping around. But but my wife is not like that at all. She is not. My wife, it's my wife. And that you peek in, she's chill, which kind of bugs me even more. But she's chill. All right, she's chill, and but she's and she'll tell me, she's like, hey, and here's the reason why. My wife, Charity, she gets hospitality. She gets this, and she tells me, it's like, Stephen, these are our people. It's our home. It's where we live. It's like, yeah, we'll pick it up. We'll make it clean. That make it presentable. But it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going, well, you don't know me at all. I'm like, because it's got to be perfect. We got to have everything picked up. Like, I'm looking at the couch. Like, well, we need a new couch. What are we doing with this couch? We need new carpet. And it's like, this is what I'm doing. This is me. I'm grumbling. I'm doing this. That's probably a bit of what Peter was talking about when he says, show hospitality without grumbling. But certainly when Peter says to show hospitality without grumbling, he's meaning to not grumble against those who are showing up. Now, Peter just said, love covers sins. Show hospitality without grumbling. When relationships get hard and those relationships are walking through your door, don't complain about it. Don't grumble about it. Love says, I'm just going to cover those things that I want to complain about, that I might grumble about. Peter says, we're in this thing together. We're exiles together. We got, the only way we're going to live this out is if we do this together. We got to love one another earnestly. And that looks like in the regular rhythm of your days, regular rhythm of your life, you're showing hospitality. You're having one another over. You're getting in each other's spaces. But not only show hospitality, but he says serve one another. In verse 10, it says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. I think you know this, but it's a good reminder that the work of ministry is not done by a few people. The work at FBCNL is not done by a few staff. But the work of ministry is done by every person that God has saved. Every person that God has saved. He says, as each has received a gift. In other words, when God saved you, he gave you a gift to put to work, to serve one another. See, this is how God does his work among us. He uses each of us as a conduit of his grace. That God reveals who he is. God's revealing his kindness and his mercy and his love and his grace. It comes to us by way of one another. As you use your gift and I use my gift, we work together to serve one another. And as we serve one another, we're seeing this is who God is. That's the grace of God. By the way that I have served you, the way you've served me, I'm seeing that this is who God is. I'm experiencing his grace. And he says, whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God. So there are some who are gifted with the ability to teach or to preach or to greet or to encourage or to pray with others. And he just said here, to understand when you use that gift, you are using it as God is speaking through you. As you use the gift that God has given you, and for some of it's to speak. And when you speak, God is using it. He's speaking through you. And then he says, as one who serves by the strength that God supplies. That God has gifted some of you, you'd be like, hey, look, what you're doing up there, Stephen, that's not my thing. And I get it. And I'm glad it's not your thing, because your thing is a thing that we need. You've got a gift. Some of you have got gifts to prepare and to serve meals, to play an instrument, to administrate, to build things, to repair things, to create videos. The list goes on and on and on. And he just says, but when you serve this way, when you serve with your hands, when you serve with your mind, when you serve this way, go all the way with it. Go all the way with it. No, not to limit. Don't limit what you do to your own strength, but in the strength that God provides. I often encourage, as I did this morning, that those on our welcome team, it's just interesting. We often have, at the 10:45, we have a huddle for all those that you see out there that are greeting you and serving you and all of that. We meet together 45 minutes before the service starts, and oftentimes what I'm saying is, look, I understand that many of you, and it's just interesting, like as I said this morning, I'm looking around the room like this is probably most of us in the room that greeted this morning that were on the welcome team. Like, we don't have natural kind of abilities for this. This is not our most comfortable spot to just be put in front of strangers and say, go say hi and make them feel welcome. Like, that's just not our thing. And so what do? This is what he's saying here. He's saying God gives you the strength to do the thing that he calls you to. God is the one that's given you the strength to fulfill the work that he has called you to. It takes faith to do that. I realize that it takes faith to do that. For some more than others, it takes faith to stand in the middle of a room and say hi to people and greet people as they're coming in. But it's there, it's faith. That's where God steps in, and that's where God works through us. He says, go in the strength that God provides. Listen, followers of Jesus, you know this. If you're following Jesus, you know this. This isn't easy. To live as an exile, to go to school where you go to school, to go to your work where you go to work, and to live in that neighborhood where you live, to live in that family where you live, and to follow Jesus. And it is so countercultural. It goes against the flow. Everybody else is about this, and they're talking about this, and you're just staying in your lane, following Jesus. That's not easy. And so Peter says, and so we have one another. Because if we don't have one another, you know what you're going to do? You're going to find yourself getting off into a drunken stupor, thinking about life in the world the way the world thinks about life in the world. And you're not going to see reality for what it really is. And so we need one another. So love one another earnestly. Show hospitality. Serve one another. This isn't easy. Suffering and following Jesus, living in a way that is mocked at, that is laughed at, that is scorned by our friends and family, to keep our minds from being swept up in the way of the world. We're going to need to be this. We're going to need to be this family for one another. We need a people that we know that are in this with us, who will not give up on us when we make a mess of things. It's going to require us to loosen our grip on what we have. That we're willing to take our homes and our money and our stuff and our time and our abilities and be generous with all of it to love and serve one another. To be a refuge for one another. As we live as exiles, as a people who do not belong here, we do not fit in here. So here's where all of this leads. Peter says, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. That when we think like this, when we live like this, when we love like this, it makes no sense to the world. It makes no sense to the world. And it points to Jesus. Church, listen, this isn't for us. What we've been given here, it's not for us. God gives us what we have to point the world to Jesus, not to use it up on us. Your home, your stuff, your position, your experience, all of these things, your abilities, it's not for you. If God has saved you, he has redeemed those things. They are his. They're to be used for his glory. When we take our gifts and our abilities and our homes and our money and we turn them inward and make it about us, well, it reminds me of something that happened several years ago. I was one of the first weddings I had ever done, and it was right here, and a wedding is like it's like the bride's day, right? I mean, we just kind of admit that, like that's just what it is. It's like the bride's day. Yeah, it's like husband and wife coming together, but let's just call it for what it is. Like this is the bride's day. This is her thing. It's her thing. It's her day, her glory, if you will, right? And so this wedding I was doing, it's all about the bride's getting ready to walk down, in white, and everybody's going to stand up, and it's a thing. And at this wedding, the bridal party or the wedding party's coming down the aisle, and here comes the bride's mother wearing a white dress, coming to take her place in the congregation. It's like, what are you doing? This is You're stealing the glory from the bride who is, your daughter. What is going on here? In the same way, when you use your gifts and abilities in your home, and your money, and your words to direct people's attention to you, you are stealing a glory that belongs to Jesus. He is the God who came to us to save us. Without him, we would be lost forever. He is the one that this whole story is about. That this act that we're in, this part of this chapter that we're in, the final chapter that we're in, it's all about him. It's all about him. And so we are spending our days as followers of Jesus, making the most of the one who is coming to make it all right. This is all about him. In all that we do, in the pain that we bear, in the good times, we direct people, no matter what it is, to the glory of Jesus. So let me just ask you, is that the agenda of your life? Is that what your life is about? Listen, I know we come in here and we go, oh yeah, amen, amen, praise the Lord, that's it, you got it. When you look at this week, is that what has been driving your life? The glory of Jesus? When you think about the conversations that you've had, when you think about how you've spent your time, when you think about how you've spent your money, when you think about what caused you to get upset, what's driving you around, like is it driven by, I just want people to see Jesus? Or have we been fooled? Have we been fooled to think that there are other things in this life? That this is just a category of my life? Let's not take this too far. I've got other things to deal with. I've got kids. I've got grandkids. We've got sports. We've got things to be a part of. I got a job. I got some money to manage. I got a vacation I'm working toward. Have we been fooled? Have we fallen into a drunken stupor of this world? How are we doing in this? Well, we need one another. We need one another to get our mind back where it needs to be. We need one another to think through the Word of God together. Listen, I just believe that I need to see others that are exhibiting faith that inspire my faith. There's a reason the Bible tells us to make him known amongst the congregation, to tell of what he's doing, because when I hear what he's doing, I'm like, yes, okay. He's still working. He's still working. I'm sure many of you have been following some of the stories that have been coming out of Ukraine, as I have. And some of the stories that I've heard, one of the things that I'm so thankful for is to hear of the church, the stories of the church in Ukraine. And the first one I heard was about a pastor. He's a pastor of a large evangelical church there in Ukraine, And he says what we're doing right now was right before the invasion came. And he said what we're doing right now is we're training our members. So we're learning CPR. We're learning how to apply tourniquets and how to open up valves. And we've got beds and cots all over the place. And this is what we're doing. The church is coming together to do this. I heard another pastor, maybe you've seen this quote, another pastor says, after all this had already begun to take place, he says, you know what? We've been here before. The church has been here before. And we can do it again. We can go underground if we need to go underground. And when I heard that, you know what I thought? There is a mentality amongst American Christians that think it's Jesus and me. That's enough. That's all it takes. And you've got people, bombs and missiles are being thrown at them going, look, if we got to go underground to meet, we will meet. We are going to meet. We can't abandon this. We've got to come together. This is what Peter is saying. We need one another. We are exiles here. I know people don't look very different from us, and they don't talk very different from us in a lot of ways. We are exiles here. Jesus is our King. We trust him. We follow him. We make him known. And we have one another in this time, in this last chapter, to do this together.